Hi there, it's Kevin with Roguedeckbuilder.com, and this is going to be a spoiler video. But before we get into the spoilers and cards that I'm very excited about from M14, because they have started to spoil M14, and there definitely was some cards that I wanted to talk about. I first want to talk about the state of Standard, and maybe why you haven't seen like big Rogue Deck Builder series, like the 6 games or the 5 games with the deck tech and the wrap up and whatnot. And it's just because the state of Standard. I'm going to talk about that right now. The problem with Standard right now is we are kind of dominated by the big 3. See, if you even look at the list here, this used to be full of, like, Jund Monsters used to have a lot more than just 20 finishes in the top 8s of everything. I can't remember what the time frame that this compiles the number of decks that are being played in, like, the Standard dailies and whatnot. I don't know what MTG Goldfish formula is for that, but I mean, yeah, this used to be a lot more diverse. I mean, we have some green devotions, we have some mono blue devotions down here, and some aggro. But the problem is that I haven't seen like aggro. I haven't seen Jund Monsters. I haven't seen like mono black aggro. This is the Zathra Necromancer white aggro. Even mono blue devotions, green devotion, all those. I haven't BG Dredge. I haven't seen that deck forever. In fact, it doesn't even show up here on MTGO, and it really is because of the big 3 here, and I'm going to tell you why here. So first of all, we have Black Devotion, which is the most popular deck, and I think it still has been doing look at this, the States. The States was really dominated by Burn and Black Devotion, and really these 2 decks are the exact same deck, BG Devotion and Black Devotion. The only difference between BG Devotion is they have a main board of Abrupt Decay, and Abrupt Decay gives the deck it's actually... Now Black has a 2-fold strategy that is really good against the Esper controls. First it has Thoughtseize and Duress to disrupt Esper control right off the bat, and then it has the Abrupt Decays to take care of the Banishing Lights and the Detention Spheres that a lot of times get the Underworld connections. So anyway, let's just check out, well, I'll talk about the big 3 decks here, of course, here. So first of all, Black Devotion, it utilizes a proactive strategy with Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize is hand disruption. Hand disruption, they look at your hand. When I used to play Jund Dredge, if they had a first turn Thoughtseize and I only had 1 removal in my hand, I knew that they were probably going to slam Pack Rat and then go for the Pack Rat strategy, or even slamming a Desecration Demon, and they've already got rid of my removal, and then I'm in a tough spot trying to top deck into the answer for that Desecration Demon. So what Mono Black's main strategy is we're going to proactively get rid of your ways to control my really, really overpowered threats if you can't handle them within a few turns. So Pack Rat gets out of control by making a ton of tokens. Desecration Demon is a 6/6 flyer for 4 that can end the game very, very quickly. So anyway, so that's the strategy of it. It's hard as a brewer to like, actually Black Devotion is probably the easiest deck as a brewer as my style of play, because I play a lot of wacky decks that are very good at top decking a lot of times. Yes, a lot of times they're combo decks and can get really hurt by Thoughtseize, but I'm okay with 1-for-1 magic. I'm okay with like dealing with a Thoughtseize for a combo piece, but I can actually go, the way I build decks, I can go get another combo piece pretty easily, and I can usually deal with like Pack Rats and Desecration Demons. So Black Devotion usually isn't the problem, but the big problem is that if I want a deck that's actually good against Black Devotion, it's very hard then to also build a deck that's good against Burn, which doesn't care what your game plan is. It's just going to do a ton of damage as quickly as possible to the face. Or Esper Control, which is going to play mass removal and mass control, and you're not going to be able to... I mean, against Esper Control, you really need to have a very proactive strategy of getting some aggression. Spike Jester is my very favorite card against Esper Control, as the card is just a nightmare. They can't Last Breath it, they can't Ultimate Price it, they can't Doomblade it. And it usually gets in there for at least 3, usually 6, and eats a removal spell. So it's better than just like a lightning strike to the face. Even if it just gets in there for 3, it's a lightning strike to the face that had to be answered with another card. So anyway, so that's the problem with Esper Control, is a lot of my decks, my Johnny style decks, are more mid-range decks, and Esper Control eats them alive. And again, if I want to make more resilient deck, if I want to put in the hate against Esper Control, then the Burn decks just punish me, because Burn, you really need to again have a proactive strategy, but this time you need to put more things that can actually stay on the board and can pass the 3 toughness test, or the Magma Jet. So you can't get Magma Jetted or Lightning Strike. You need to put out cards like Plukernos or just big cards that they have to use to chain the rocks, and actually ways to continue to make them get rid of threats on the board, or you're going to erase them in the damage department. So, and again, Burns a lot of times just laughs at those mid-range creatures and just goes straight to your face. So I'm just gonna bring up these decks and tell you why I don't like these style of decks, and why I think that they're kind of boring for standard. So again, here's the mono black list. It runs 4 Thoughtseizes and a main board of Duress. We have a ton of like Ultimate Price, Devour Flesh, Hero's Downfall, and then Unreal Connections to fill back up their hand. And then we have, again, Lifebane Zombie that, hoses any sort of green or white deck. Nightveil Spectre that is annoying. It gets cards off the top of the library. But again, Mono Black's other strategy is then just to stabilize with Green Merchants. And of course, I talked about Pack Rat and Desecration Demon. So playing the deck is very unfun because every one of the matches tends to go the exact same way. There's not a ton of decision making to be done. Again, my favorite way to play Magic is where both players are trying their hardest to set up like a board state to be able to outplay their opponent. And I really like a lot of interaction between the two opponents. And Mono Black, again, isn't my biggest beef. Mono Black is fine. I am annoyed a little bit by Thoughtseize because, again, Thoughtseize tends to disrupt your opponent's whole game plan, and again, then they're playing the boring cards like Pack Rat and Desecration Demon that are just very powerful if you can see their hand and know what they're trying to do. But again, Mono Black Devotion isn't my biggest pet peeve here. So we'll look at the BG Devotion list here. Again, it's the exact same list, except this one, a lot of these decks just use like either one or two of Abrupt Decay, and then two or three of Abrupt Decay and a 1 of Vraska. And then the only other splash they have is Golgari Charm, which can actually make their stuff. Again, it's more hate against the Detention Spheres, and it's also very good against Supreme Verdict, as it's a way to actually quote-unquote counter the Supreme Verdict because you're giving your stuff indestructible. So anyway, but then you check out the other list. So if you're going to be able to beat Mono Black, you have to be able to play the Attrition War. Attrition being card for card, you got to somehow get ahead in the card advantage and resolve their threats by still resolving your own threats. So then we have Esper Control, which I am going to be so glad. Again, I hope I don't get any hate for this. Well, I'm going to get hate from the blue players because, if this is your style play, this is your style play. I'm not trying to insult you personally. This is my experience. Any game you have, in hockey, I usually don't like incredibly defensive teams. Back in the 90s, there used to be a strategy called the left wing lock. I think that it made Magic incredibly boring. Or not Magic, excuse me, hockey incredibly boring back then, and until they got rid of the 2-line pass out of hockey, hockey it was just one of those necessary evils you had to deal with, was the left wing lock, and the teams like Dallas, which has very soft, slow ice, used to really utilize the left wing lock, and it made the games very boring. But I mean, hockey was still a great game. So again, I'm not going to say that I hate Magic because of Supreme Verdict and Sphinx's Revelation, and all those that play this are horrible, awful people that are ruining the game. I'm not going to say that. This is just a personal opinion of mine. I don't like to play counter Magic. I don't like to play like massive control. I like to be proactively doing something. I like to be actually setting up a strategy, not reacting to my opponent. And I'm okay with control decks. The problem I really have right now is basically just 2 cards out of the Esper Control, and it's Supreme Verdict and Sphinx's Revelation. Because both of these cards I consider lazy cards. The first one, Supreme Verdict, it's a uncounterable. So you cannot counter. So I mean, it really hoses other blue decks. What it really hoses is tempo. I really think that we would see Young Pyromancer or cards that like tempo decks. Like Delver was a tempo deck, and a lot of times it wasn't even Delver that killed. It was the why can't I think of the unblockable hexproof guy? The unblockable hexproof guy. Equipped to a Rune Chanter's Pike, and it made control extremely awful because, I mean, yes, Delver was kind of a control deck, but it's more of a tempo deck. They played counter Magic like Mana Leaks, but, I mean, they tried just to balance your opponent's threats, and they put a very fast aggression on the board. Now, I wasn't a fan of Delver. The reason I wasn't a fan of Delver, it was just clearly the most powerful deck. We had too many powerful early cards to make that deck the clear-cut winner of the format. It really warped the format, and you really couldn't play anything but Delver at that time. So, anyway, this Supreme Verdict, if it would have existed back during the Scars and Mirrodin Innistrad days, I think that it would have easily taken care of the Delver strategy, and we had some really overpowered Esper control cards back then. But anyway, Supreme Verdict is just one of those, again, lazy You know it's going to stick. You know you can rely on it. And it just really dampers a lot of game plans, anything that tries to put out multiple creatures and whatnot. So, and then Sphinx's Revelation, again, I'm not saying these are the most powerful cards ever. They're just lazy cards. They're just things that you're just... They're safety nets. They're huge safety nets that Esper can just rely on having, and they don't really have to put much thought into what their game plan is going to be, because Sphinx's Revelation is just going to fill up their hand. Supreme Verdict's just going to be the biggest safety net against creatures ever. So yeah, so it's really taking down a lot of archetypes that would be good against Mono Black, because Mono Black, one of its things that it's weak against is being swarmed, and Supreme Verdict really takes care of that. So even Supreme Verdict's allowing the Mono Blacks not to use many Drowning Sorrows or Bile Blights. So anywho, then we have Sphinx's Revelation that does two of the exact necessary things that Esper Control wants to do. It stabilizes them through gaining life, and it fills up their hand. So they can be as greedy as they want with the removal. They can use Supreme Verdict as a 1-for-1. They can dissolve threats that maybe not even be the greatest threats. They can be greedy with the Azorius Charms and whatnot, because they're just going to fill up their hand with Sphinx's Revelation. So again, that's another reason why I'm not a fan of Standard right now, is you've got those two opposing control, Mono Black trying to control 1-for-1s, and Esper Control trying to do massive things with Supreme Verdicts and Sphinx's Revelations. And then even like Jace, Architect of Thought, and Elspeth as the finishers. Again, Jace is going to put your opponent, you either fill up their hand immediately, or it's going to protect itself against a lot of like tokens and weenies and things like that. So anywho, and then to make matters worse, you've got this Aetherling that you resolve this and it basically is game, because there's really no way you can deal with it besides like a needle and whatnot. So anyway, let's go on to make even matters worse in Standard, is you have this shenanigans. You have a Burn. And I used to be an aggressive player, so the old Kevin, if he could travel in the future, he'd probably stab me in the back right here, because I started out as a Burn player, and I used to love Burn because it tended to do well against the control decks, and it was just one of those things that I was a fast, aggressive player. When I used to play StarCraft, I was Zerg, and this felt like Zerg. This felt like, even though it's not with creatures, it felt like what Zerg wanted to do, just blitz the opponent as quick as possible. And if you look at this list, again, a lot of times it doesn't even care what its opponent's going to do, because it's just going to Boros Charm for 4. Magma Jet's going to get rid of the excess lands. We've got the Skullcrack, and we have Warrior's Helix. All these things are going to do 3 to 4 damages, which is what the card wants to do. Then you have the control like Chain of the Rocks that if you need to use, you can use. And then Searing Blood is very good against killing early drops too. Again, it's very hard to face Burn with an aggressive creature deck, because Searing Blood just really blows you out of the water. And then they have access to Satyr Fire Dancer in the sideboard that makes all their Boros Charms actual creature removals again. So this is a very Burn. I'm okay with players playing Burn, but right now if we're going to build a deck to beat Esper Control and Mono Black, it's really hard to then beat Burn, and Burn is the wrench in the strategy that completely solidifies that we're not going to be able to brew any creative decks in Standard right now. And that's just a big stake to the heart for me, because there's so many Journey to Nyx cards that I want to brew with. Disciple Deceit, I fall in love with that card. We have, of course, so many interactions with Hidden Strings and Battlefield Thaumaturge, and a lot of these Strive cards are just awesome cards to work with. Flame Speaker, Prophetic Flame Speaker, I really want to get him to work. And right now, trying to build a deck against the big three, just a little too hard to do so. And maybe I'm just being a bad player here. I don't know, a bad brewer, that I can't figure out a way to actually beat the big three. But this is the problem I'm having. So anyway, let's just talk about why all these three decks for a moment are acceptable choices. If you look at all of them, Burn doesn't have a terrible matchup against either Esper or Mono Black. They are all pretty coin flip matchups. Esper Control, depending on if it can land its dissolves, its negates, because they bring in negates and dissolves and ways to stabilize against Burn. Some are even playing the Sheep, the 0/5 that gains life each turn, and they can stabilize. So it really is who draws the better cards. And again, it's not really even outplaying your opponents. Who draws the better cards in that matchup really defines And you can make that argument that, well, that's Magic. But as you've watched, like watching the Pro Tour and watching other major tournaments, and as all the experience I've had as a player, player skill comes into play a lot. Yes, drawing the correct cards, not getting mana screwed, top decking the answers when you need them, that plays a huge role in your success to Magic. But also outplaying, and that same thing with poker. I used to be a poker player, and people always think that's just a huge game of luck. Skill comes into play. Yeah, like I would say, even if it was like 15% was based upon skill, that's going to be the difference between winning a Pro Tour and, you know, top 64ing a Pro Tour, or even day 2ing a Pro Tour. So skill comes into play a lot. Like even at my local game store, it's very rare if I don't make like a top 2 or a top 4 or even win the tournament. It's very, very rare, just because skill does come into play in Magic and whatnot. But again, this Magic, I like it when skill is actually the most defining part of Magic, and not like, you know, may the best cards win, like I think the standard is kind of evolved into at this point. So anywho, let's then go on to, of course, BG Devotion, and see how it matches up against Burn and Esper Control. Again, these are coin flips. If BG Devotion gets its Thoughtseize and its Duresses out early against the Esper Control, you can disrupt their game plan. You can say, oh, they kept kind of a greedy hand. They were relying on Sphinx's Revelation. Let's take the Sphinx's Revelation, and now they're going to have to rely on either, you know, top decking into that, or it's like, oh, they have one counter magic up. Let's take the Dissolve, and hopefully we can get in for a couple hits with Nightveil Spectre, or whatnot, or I know I'm going to resolve my Pack Rat. They don't have a Supreme Verdict. They're going to have to find a Supreme Verdict or Detention Sphere, and you can set up a game plan, and it's a way that you can actually, you know, be proactive against Esper Control and win. And that's why when Esper Control got really big, I'm like, okay, well, maybe this will take down Black Devotion, but they adjusted, and they brought in stuff that is really good, and their sideboard is just packed full of hate against the Esper Control, like Duress, Erebos, Golgari Charm, all are very good against the Esper Control list. So, and then against Burn, same thing. Burn, you can still, resolving a Desecration Demon versus Burn, and you don't have a Chain of the Rocks for it, can be a nightmare, because you can race them, and then you can follow it up with a Grey Merchant. They don't have the Skull Crack. You can just become out of the life reach. Now, Burn does tend to be a pretty good matchup against Black. Thoughtseizes are very bad versus Burn, so they take them out for Duresses. And Honorable Connections, of course, are pretty bad against Burn too. And you have a lot of dead removal. So they do have that strategy. The Burn does have that going for it. But again, it's not an unwinnable matchup. Black Devotion can beat Burn. It's very, very common to see a Black Devotion beat Burn, and of course vice versa. So, and then we can go over to the Esper Control list, and again, and see how they match up against the top 2. Well, their main board is really good against dealing with the mono black. You've got Detention Spheres to take care of Pack Rats. You've got Supreme Verdicts to take care of Pack Rats. Mono black tends to be very slow with nothing like has haste. Nothing really impacts the board immediately besides Grey Merchant. So it's very good for Esper Control to play a reactive type game. You know, they try to attack with their Desecration Demon. You can just throw it back on top of the Zori's Charm. They have a lot of dead cards main board with like Bile Blights, Ultimate Price, Doomblades. Do absolutely nothing. I mean, Bile Blight at least can kill Sun Champions tokens, Elspeth tokens. But at that point, then Elspeth then again just, you know, spits out some more tokens. Hero's Downfall does deal with Elspeth, but Hero's Downfall and Jace, but I mean, again, it's one of those things getting stuck in the hand for quite a while they just control the field and eventually just get there. And then again, post board, though, they have the Duresses. So Esper does, you know, it's not uncommon to see Esper just completely destroy Mono Black, and vice versa. It's not uncommon to actually see Mono Black take games versus Esper. You do give the slight favor to Esper, but how they're building the Black Devotion decks, it's not an unwinnable matchup. So again, when you're going to a major tournament, you don't want any just striking holes in your deck. And I think all 3 of these decks have ways to beat each other, and none of them have these like huge unfavorable matchups. So yeah, so again, if you're going to a major tournament, it just makes sense to play Esper Control, Mono Black Devotion, or Burn. And then now we can see why some of these other decks are starting to fall by the wayside, because the Black-White mid-range just really folds to Bile Blight. Even if you get the... Oh, wait, this is Black-White mid-range. Excuse me, this is just another mono-black type list. where they use Obstinate and Blood Baron and Elspeth, and then it's just the black shell. But what I'm thinking about black right aggro is with Zathard Necromancer. We haven't seen that list for a while because it can just fold to Bile Blight. White aggro can be kind of nice. I mean, white aggro actually does match up good against Esper Control, Black Devotion, and Burn. But again, they're not unwinnable matchups for them. And again, like Searing Blood, if you don't have the God's Willings, can be very hard for white aggro. You take the 3 damage and lose one of your key cards. Bile Blight can just be a blowout versus white aggro. Drown in Sorrow can be a blowout. Ultimate Price are really good. Doomblade. And then just dropping a Desecration Demon can sometimes be just like a nightmare. And then same thing with Esper Control. White aggro can blitz them and beat them. But then a Detention Sphere, Supreme Verdict, Azorius Charmer are all very good against that. Jund Monsters, unfortunately, is just being hated out way too much by the 2 control decks. Burn, and then sometimes Burn can just outrace Jund Monsters. Like the best card in Jund Monsters is probably Corsair Crufix versus Burn, but again, a lot of times they can just go straight to the face. It's not an unwinnable matchup for Burn, and so Jund Monsters doesn't particularly have any like amazing matchups versus the top 3. So that's the point here. None of these have really amazing matchups versus the top 3 here. I mean, Mono Black aggro, again, it can be pretty good against both Black Devotion and the Esper Control, but again, they're not unwinnable, and they're not even that heavy of favorites versus them. So anyway, that's the gist of it. That is my state of standard. I guess I'll do a separate video for the spoiler videos. Again, I'm hoping to have your criticism, your critiques here. Constructive, please. Don't just call me well, you can call me whatever you want. I think I have a thick enough skin now to deal with the YouTube trolls, but I'm hoping this actually gets into some constructive feedback here about what direction Standard you hope Standard goes in the next set. What do you think would make Standard better? I mean, M15 does have some very exciting cards. I'll talk about them in the next video, and just let me know what you think about the video, Standard, what you're playing, etc., etc., etc. I'd like to hear from the fan base, and maybe I'm just really out of touch here. This has been Kevin with Roguedeckbuilder.com. Thanks for watching.